mother gives you, don't do anything at all. Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. And if you go chasing rabbits and you know you're going to fall, tell 'em a hookah, smoking caterpillar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a special guest, Rich Benjamin, and today he's going to be rather uncomfortable because he's normally behind the camera. So I got him to show his face. Now, for many of you who don't know who he is, he's been interviewing, veterans for quite some time. And was it last year that you went to SOAR and you interviewed some of the men? And for
Yep.
people who don't know what SOAR is, that's like the special ops, association. It's in Vegas. Not anybody can go. You've got to have some friends in the right places. So as this is kind of a SOG based podcast, can we talk about how you were able to interact with some of those people? And had you ever met anyone from SOG before?
My very beginning, the first thing I ever filmed was here in Tennessee, and the folks at the Tennessee Museum of Aviation reached out to us and they said, "Hey, we're having a group come in. Would you like to film it?" And it turned out to be Operation Tailwind. It was a reunion, and I had no clue. Total novice. I walked into a room with the largest legends and had no clue who they were, just knew I was having a good time filming. And as time went on, that was, man, 10 years ago. And at some point, I had reached out to Jim Moriarty, who was the attorney that represented all of the people against CNN, all the soldiers against CNN. And I said, I'm working on another piece. May I use a piece of your footage? And he said, "You're more than welcome to, blah, blah, blah." Then we came to last year, and Tilt Meyer had introduced me back to the same people because they wanted to do an introduction with Gary Mike Rose, and they wanted to do a piece all about Operation Tailwind at SOAR. And when I got on the Zoom call with them, I said, they said, "We'd really like to include this." And I said, "Well, where's Mike? Where does he live?" And they said, "Well, Huntsville." I said, "That's 4 hours from me. You need me to go film him?" And they said, "Would you go film him?" I said, "God, yeah, I'll go." So that's, in a roundabout way, how I got invited to SOAR. I will tell you that, it's not uncommon when you walk in that room for the first time to have, I call it the sniff test. Boy, they sniff you over pretty hard, and they want to make sure that your intentions are true and honest, and that you're not there to malign anybody. So the same thing happened at the A1 Sky Raider reunion, my first one there. Who are you, and what are you doing here with that camera? So fortunately, I've gained some trust in that area. And last year I wound up filming. I was going to do just Operation Tailwind and film that. And I showed up, and I looked at them. I said, "I'm here for 5 days. Do you want me to leave these cameras set up and film everything?" And they were like, "Nobody's ever offered to do that." I said, "I'm here for 5 days. All I'm going to be doing is talking to people. Why don't I capture this?" And they really appreciated that, and the other thing was, I never charge veterans anything. We never charge veterans. So if I can do something to capture a moment, that's what I do. But they appreciated the effort that I would go not only to Huntsville, produce the piece, but they really appreciated the fact that I would come to Vegas and on my own dime and do what I do. So
It's funny because when I first got into all this and all this, meaning the interviews and my books, it was Tilt that really vetted me. And he said, "I want to call you." And I went, "Okay." So he said, "Hi, it's John." It's like, I'm going, "Oh shit, it's John." Oh,
yep.
anyway, we talked, and he found out what my objective was, which is you and I are on the same page. I have the ability to do some artwork and some graphics and some books. And most importantly, I don't want the history to be lost. And he goes,
Exactly.
okay. He goes, okay. All right. Okay. Thanks. And from that day on, once you're in, but I have said this to a lot of other younger people or any age people. If you don't have a tough skin with these guys, they're going to see it and they're going to eat you. And so you have to be confident, and you have to have a game plan before, and as you stated, be aware that they are going to come up to you and say, "What are you doing here?"
Oh
And
yeah.
what is your intention with our history? You're not a veteran, and your father wasn't, you know. So what's the deal here? And if you're intimidated by that kind of behavior, don't even venture down the road.
Yep.
Just don't. But
You know, you have to, as you say, you better have thick skin. And that
yeah,
has come up several times.
yeah,
I did not serve. I was 22, been through, 3 years of college in New York, 2 here in Tennessee, and I'd had it with college. I was like, this isn't going anywhere. It just seems to be dumping money into a hole for some hopeful gain down the road. And I was going home, and I had a buddy that was getting married, and I was going to go to his bachelor party, and I said, there's that girl I like that moved to Hawaii. I'm going to go to Hawaii, chase her, and I'm going to join the military when I get there. I got home, got in a car accident, and that ended everything moving forward. So I broke my back, and I wound up. It took me about 2 years to get where I could walk, really without a
oh,
limp. So my thing was, I kind of missed that window. And life took me in a totally different direction. I stayed into marketing and sales and advertising, and I truly enjoy what I do there. But when I got the opportunity to start filming veterans,
mhm,
I felt like I had a purpose.
yeah,
And it was one of the Skyraider pilots, Roger Youngblood.
yeah.
You've interviewed him, haven't you?
I haven't interviewed him, but I've talked to him quite a few times, and he's a cool guy, you know.
Oh, without a doubt. Well, he was in the second year, the second Operation Tailwind reunion. He was a keynote speaker because he smuggled the airplanes out of Utapao, Thailand. So there were tons of F-5s, there were helicopters. He got sent there with Jack Drummond, and General Adderholt said, "Get our aircraft out of there because the North Vietnamese are going to come claim all that." And, at the end of the war, I think South Vietnam was the fourth largest air force in the world.
Really?
So, oh yeah, they did not want to leave those assets behind. So they're over there smuggling these planes and everything they can out. And they get right down to the Sky Raiders, and there's 12 of them sitting there. And Roger and Jack start getting them out. They get two out, and somebody from SAC shows up and says, "You're not even current in this. When's the last time you flew this plane?" And they
Wow.
were like, yesterday. So they hadn't been in one for years, but they had flown it somewhere. And the State Department shut them down. They got 4 Sky Raiders out, and the others sat left behind. But they wound up destroying anything that had a gun or anything in it. The crew chiefs are going through with torches, just cutting things out, dropping the guns on the ground, throwing them in. And they said we left them junk. So if the North Vietnamese showed up, they were getting garbage, So
Not to take this on a major twist, like a political twist, but isn't it ironic that the powers that be should be reading about historical events, as they say, the history always
it
repeats
repeats.
itself. So Afghanistan, well, lots of stuff got left there, and
Yep,
lots and lots. And whose hands did it fall into?
correct. If you look back, you never hear about the fall of Cambodia,
No.
correct? You never see anything there. General Adderholt had worked with the Cambodians and moved all of our equipment out, moved all of their people out. They had a plan. So everybody was moved out. So you never saw any of that catastrophe. The South Vietnamese refused to even contemplate that they were going to fail. So no plan was set in place. And then all of a sudden they said, "We surrender." And everything went and collapsed, and there was no exit strategy. So Adderholt was a genius at moving equipment and people and getting all those parts out. And like you say, if someone, and I guess that's why I do what I do, I hope someone will pay attention and realize in history that there are very bright people, and all you've got to do is follow that same pattern. You do not have to make it up as you go. This has all happened before. How was it executed? How did somebody solve this problem without making such a mess? It's just when the Taliban came crashing down, and you start closing bases without a strategic plan, it just created a terrible mess like we saw.
What I've learned, and just for the record, I've always said that I'm not pro-war, but I'm pro soldier,
Yep.
and for what they did. And when you talk to these, especially the combat veterans, you realize how many screw ups that there were, and how many egos that there were who would not accept anyone else's advice or comments. No, we're doing it my way, just because they couldn't accept that. And that really is very shocking.
Couple of years ago, I was over in Charleston at the NKP reunion, and their speaker was Joseph Haas Milligan. He was Robin Oll's wingman,
Okay.
and he got shot down, and he spent, I think it was 6.5 years
Wow.
as a POW. He had been sent to NKP by Robin Olds because Robin was trying to figure out how is the Phenom, how do they get their information so much quicker than we do? Here we are being dispatched with old data. Well, NKP is where Igloo White
Right.
was, that McNamara's, mechanized or computer software super duper intel center was. So basically the information was going from Igloo White, Task Force Alpha, right over to the base. There were guys going, okay, we need to do this. There's a gun emplacement here. This is what we need to be aware of. Those poor guys with Robin Olds, that information went back to the US, got milled around by whomever, and then came all the way back over. So they were so far behind. And Haas, he was leaving NKP, going back, and he's going to give a report to Robin and go, they're getting all their intel right there. But he got shot down that day, so he was never able to give his debrief to Robin Olds to tell him how that base was operating so much more efficiently with information.
Now, here's a question as kind of a complete sidebar here is not from your personal opinion, from the veterans that you've talked to, do you think that there were men left behind after the Vietnam War?
I deal mostly with the Air Force. So I've had one or two where they've alluded that they knew there was a EC-47 that was shot down after the war was over, and the
Wow.
crew was spirited away. It was weeks after, but we were still running intel, and they found the pilots, but they found none of the security people.
Really?
So, yeah, their bodies were missing. They went in and investigated the crash site. So there's a crew missing, and I cannot remember the name
Yeah.
of that ship. There's so many. When you're doing the interviews, everybody's telling everything. It's like drinking from a fire hose. But
Yeah.
the interview I did with Doug Davis, the EC-47 pilot, he was the one that was alluding to that. And I've heard very similar things, so I would say yes, even from the Air Force side, that I've heard that there were people that were spirited away and wound up Russia, China, somewhere, because of their intelligence, and what they could provide.
Yeah.
But I don't, guys on the ground, nobody came out of Laos. The Pathet Lao turned over no prisoners of
Yeah.
war. Everything came out of, North Vietnam, South Vietnam. Where did all those guys go?
From the SF guys, and we'll narrow it down to SOG, I've asked them the same question. And not one of them that I have asked has said no. They all believe what they have said, and I believe on being very factual and not ad-libbing what these guys have told me, that they said probably up until the mid 80s there were some people being held against their will. He said after that, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
But, it's really unfortunate. And what is amazing is with the internet, there's so many documents that were sealed that are now not sealed. And for yourself or for myself, even if they are, redacted in some way, you and I know enough of the chat to be able to fill in those blanks.
And read between the lines. Yeah, a lot of the
Yes,
time. And
and
the hard thing is finding the documentation. When I try to go and I'm trying to work through like the National Archives or whatever military branch, it's hard to lay your hands, even though it's declassified. It's hard to lay your hands on what you're looking for. It is not a Dewey Decimal System, and I just go to row 7. No, it's not. Yeah, you're working hard to find what you're looking for.
probably it might. I mean, it's a good thing that you can't see behind me on the floor because I have stacks of paperwork. And what is amazing is one document might have some areas blacked out that was released in the mid 60s. Not sorry, not mid 60s, but released at some point, and then other more recent stuff doesn't have that redaction. So you really gotta be able to have a brain that you can, okay. And I'm working on a project now, which is a bit from here, a bit from there, and then I'm trying to piece it together like a puzzle. And at times I find myself, drooling, and trying to piece together that without, losing my focus.
Yep. I'm working on a project right now. I was telling you about Stinger 41, and I went and interviewed Lieutenant General Tom Wasco. He's a retired Air Force general. He was one of 2 facts that day, and he saw that somebody decided in their infinite wisdom that when a parachute, a bunch of ammunition was dropped over An Loc, a city that was under siege, it landed outside of our control. And somebody said, hey, let's take that AC 119 that flies at night, that's painted black. Let's fly it up there in the middle of the day. It makes circles and see if we can't shoot that stuff on the ground. Well, they made it through 2 circles and got shot down, and they were still trying to locate it. It was the wrong piece of equipment to send. And Tom, he's like, we could have done that with 2 F4s. But the thing that I'm working on with him is the paperwork for all the guys. There was 10 crew on board, 3 perished, and 7 got out. The pilot got the Distinguished Flying Cross, I believe, and the rest of the crew, their awards and decorations were lost in paperwork. So the paperwork was lost all those years ago, and he found out 50 years later that this has happened, and they're trying to push that forward. And they've gone through twice now. And again, paperwork is always the thing when you're in the military. If it's not absolutely perfect, it doesn't make it. Well, the last time they put this through, 27 generals took one glance at it and said, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Gets to awards and deck. They are 6 days from holding this party with all these family members of the survivors and awarding them their awards, and it gets denied, which was an absolute shock. So what we're doing is we're recording this piece of history with the general. I'm working on getting some footage right now of an AC 119. That piece will be out very soon. Our hope is to have the first person testimonies and kind of put a little more emphasis on this really should happen. These guys, before they all pass away, they really should be awarded. And the ones that, have passed away, let's give them and their families the honor and that they deserve, because they were sent on a very, truly a suicide mission. You take a big lumbering twin engine beast that's, just chugging along about 250 miles an hour, and you start making circles over a site. And one of the guys said, by definition, I think that's what they call a target, and I mean, just the North Vietnamese, there was more anti-aircraft in that area. It was the heaviest defended airspace of the war at the Battle of An Loc. So, these guys went and they knew what they were getting into, and they went anyway. They didn't shirk their duty. They said, yes, sir. And they went, so that's our goal with this piece. But same thing, getting through that paperwork to the right place is always the challenge.
Yeah. I think I would like to add to people who are watching. Both Rich and I are on the same page that history, these guys' history should not be lost. If you have a neighbor or if you have a friend, a family member who did serve in any war or in any part of the military, these days you can do a lot on your iPhone, and get their story on there, and when at least that you'll be saving that piece of history. Don't be overwhelmed. Rich and I were talking earlier that it doesn't have to be perfect. The main goal is to get those people's histories from being lost.
Yep.
um, you know yeah, it's and you can, like I said, with your phone these days, if I would, I mean, this is a computer. This is more than just a phone, right?
Yep.
So you can do a lot
Absolutely.
with those apps.
I have people tell me all the time, I need a really professional camera. And I said, you have no idea what you're holding in your hand.
Yeah.
The camera in there for what we do is overkill. I mean, it's you just have to be lit well. That's the only thing
Yeah.
with a cell phone. They really are light thirsty. So like where you're sitting is a perfect place. Where me, it may be a little dark here, but just lit well and have a unobscured path for the sound.
Yeah.
Like I was telling you earlier, there's so many programs out there. If it doesn't sound right, there's programs that you can pull those people closer. That Adobe podcast is just brilliant for what it does with cell phones.
I'm kind of jumping around here a bit. Have you met any families whose fathers are still MIA or were MIA?
As a matter of fact, Brian Danielson, his father was, give me a second. His father, Ben Danielson, was shot down, and Woody Bergeron was his backseater, and they were over the Magia Pass area. And for years, Brian they held his father as MIA.
Mm-hmm.
Woody was pretty sure that his dad was killed. They didn't pick him up. But hold on one second. Let me just Google that, and I'll do that while we're here. I'm sorry, but it's and I don't know why that escaped me all of a sudden. But yes, and there was two or three of them. Brian took two other family members that were at the A1 Skyraider reunion, and they all went back to Vietnam, and they were looking for supposedly a tail fin from Brian's father's F4 was in an orphanage. Well, it didn't turn out to be his dad's. It turned out to be the second guy's. And then they were going upriver to check out another crash site, and they went, hours upriver. And they get off the boat, and one guy says, "Man, I'm tired. I'm not going to go through the jungle. I'm exhausted. I'm going to stay here." And Brian and the other dude start heading up through the jungle, and all of a sudden there's this screaming, and they come out, and the guy literally kicked over in the sand the cowling from his father's Skyraider.
Are you
So,
serious?
seriously, and they found that aircraft just where they pulled up. So Brian was, he was very sad that, didn't find anything of his father's. But I was like, look what you did.
Yeah.
Those two, the closure for those two,
Yeah.
was fantastic. I'm just going to pull it up real quick.
Yeah,
Sorry.
just for the people watching, while you do that, there's often some confusion when a man was listed as MIA, that there's more than one designation for MIA. There can be BNR, that they know the man has been killed in action, but they can't get to the body in time. So there's you really got to do some background work on that. The reason I asked you about that, Rich, was because I'm going to try and get a few families. I know some people whose fathers are still MIA, and I think it would be a good thing to get their stories out. Well, I mean, their children are kind of our age too, so
That was I'm sorry for the
that's okay.
brain lock on that, but it was Boxer 2-2, Alpha and Bravo, and Alpha was Ben Danielson, and he did not make it. But they later on they did find Brian's father's body, and
Really?
he was repatriated. Yes, so he is no longer MIA. But yes, and there's a group of them, of people, and we're seeing more of those people join the A1 Sky Raider Association. I stayed pretty tight in that
Yeah.
group. They supplied most of the air assets for the search and rescue, or the combat search and recovery and rescue. So I've met several of those people. Yes, that their fathers were MIA.
With the Sky Raider, I mean, I saw one up, not here, but down in the States, and I was amazed on how big they are. And for those that don't know, this is basically a World War II plane at the very, very tail end, with older technology, but it offers such a platform. They would call that a slow mover, so that they
Yep.
could. It was actually better that they could get on target. And they did save a lot of men's lives in SOG as well. I mean, that's where my area of knowledge is, and I know that the SOG community is really very thankful to many of those men. I know that Tilt has written one story that he saw the actual, plane fly overhead, and he could see the rivets, and the guy just, saluted.
Yep.
That's just wild.
Yeah, they were. All Sky Raiders performed all kinds of duties as far as bombing. They would do insertion, seeding the trail with sensors. They would do truck killing at night. They did everything but search and rescue. When you speak to any Sky Raider pilot, that was the mission that they would literally die. They would give their life in a heartbeat to save that guy on the ground. They would do whatever it took. And they said when those guys called, you did everything you could. Don Engebretson, have you talked to Don at all?
Oh,
Don is he's one of the guys that was in a group. It was OLA, Operation Location Alpha Alpha. They were based out of Da Nang in 1970, 71. There was a cutback, and they were closing Pleiku, which was very close to the trail. And they informed the Army, yeah, we're going to be running out of NKP, and SOG went, wait, we're going to get killed out here. We need dedicated assets with us. So OLA was formed, and they operated out of Da Nang, which was much closer to everything. They were basically at the same base. They would launch, they would escort the insertion, and they would loiter outside in case they had a prairie fire emergency. If that was called, they were right back in on it, and they were, their job, their total task was either search and rescue for downed pilots or prairie fire emergencies. They were tasked with two things instead of bombing and doing whatever else. Their whole focus was just that. And I think there was 12 planes and 14 pilots. So, they were a very small unit, and they ran round the clock. And, when you talk to them, they'll tell you, we flew in the weeds. And I'm like, well, how high is the weeds? And they're like 50 feet. I'm like, holy God, but they got down and just chewed things up. When that SOG team was in trouble, they would just go nuts.
Prairie fire. Do you want to explain to the public listening what that means?
Yep. Prairie, there were two terms when teams were in country. A prairie fire was when you would drop a SOG team in Laos. In Cambodia, it was called Daniel Boone. But as time went on, you would run into an emergency. They would get troops in contact. The team would get discovered, and they would call in a prairie fire emergency, which brought in air assets from everywhere. And the forward air controllers typically in those areas would have, say, if it was a Covey vac, he would have a Covey rider, which would be one of those special forces 10s in that airplane with him. And he became the battlefield commander. He would call the plays and let everybody know where everything was. Typically in a search and rescue, the Sky Raider Sandy aircraft would come in and they would run everything. But when you had SOG, that guy, the Covey rider, or that 10 in that airplane, he became the lifeline, and he called all the plays. I need 50 millimeter over here. I need CBU strikes over here, and the guys would just go in and do their thing, and they work very effectively in those settings.
Now the public knows.
Well, I
Now,
actually heard there was a gentleman during the war, and it was so top secret that if you even mentioned anything, if you said the word prairie fire in public, I mean it was a serious offense. And somebody was just chatting in an airport, and somebody said something about a prairie fire. Man, that dude was scooped up and walked out, and it got serious. You could There was so much concern about infiltration, of moles. And you talk to the SOG guys, they know there were
oh yeah.
moles. The South Vietnamese, they had been, the Vietnam had been at wars,
Yep.
with since the Chinese for thousands of years,
Yeah.
so they were a country divided, but they're still trying to come together. It was a very, very challenging place to operate.
Now, one of the people that you did interview, I thought he was a really interesting guy, and that was the South Vietnamese pilot. Was his name Rose? Was that
No, no, that was um,
Dove? So
it's Pham
Swan.
Xuan.
That's it. Yeah, I'm thinking Dove. I
I
don't.
No, you're
Sorry.
good. I just released his full video this
Wow.
weekend. I had done pieces and parts, and again, we were talking about when you go live with the camera.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not what's
Yeah.
going to go wrong. Something's going to go wrong. You got to fix it. And I was able to use some new tools and clear up where I had two cameras running and one quit, but I was able to pull it together and fix the issues. But his Swan, he flew with the South Vietnamese, the 530th, and he was out of Pleiku. And they did the same thing. I mean, they were troops in contact all the time. They were supporting their own Red Berets, which were supposedly the South Vietnamese version of our Rangers or Green Berets. They were very special forces, and they were very good at hit and run tactics. But then they got used as conventional forces, and they just got chewed up. So, but he flew for 4 years, and it was funny during after the interview. I looked at him. I said, "So you got shot down 5 times, 6 times?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "So you're a North Vietnamese ace, right?" He's like, "That's not funny." So he, yeah, he talks about getting shot up really bad and having to crash at Dak To. And that's a helicopter base. There's not enough room. So he comes crashing in there, and the plane finally stops, and he looks out, and he's 20 feet from Constantine wire, and it's got skull and crossbone signs on it. It says "Do not cross minefield." And he's like, "I almost slid into a minefield," and he is a very interesting gentleman. Interesting story. When he came to the States, here's a guy, and this is what a lot of military guys run through. They go from commanding
Yeah.
men in combat, and you come back, and what was his job? He got a job as a busboy at working at a community college, and his wife said, you need to get an education. So he got an engineering degree, went to work for Philip Morris. He's the guy that invented the electronic cigarette. He has like 36 patents,
Really?
you know. Oh yeah,
Wow.
brilliant guy. Just, but he took everything he learned, and he said, Vietnam taught me a lot of lessons. He said, you never quit, you never give
Yeah.
up, you never quit. And he's a brilliant guy. I love him. I was just on the phone with him earlier today. I was hoping he was coming through this area and we could catch up. He's traveling, but we're not going to get to see each other. But great guy, great guy.
Now, with your interaction with the pilots, they're like, PTSD. I would imagine I know PTSD is the same in itself, but with ground troops, and I would imagine with air, there's a bit of a difference. So that's my question to you: is what for them?
Each one of them carries their own PTSD, but when you get down to somebody on the ground, it was a much more boy, it was graphic.
Mhm.
The there was a pilot and his wingman was shot down in front of him. And we were at Dayton, Ohio, and he just started talking about his wingman. And I said, well, what happened to him? We're having beers, no camera, no nothing.
Yeah.
And he starts telling me about his friend. And I mean, he unravels. He goes, it's my fault. He said, we just kept going back out on target. We went in on the same path, and he just exploded in front of me. It was, and, you know, they each carry that. I had one gentleman. He was a general, and he said, I never talk about my roommate, and I'm thinking because he was in intelligence. Well, what happened to your roommate? And
Yeah.
again, this is right after we shut the cameras off. None of them want to open up and
Yeah.
have that be seen. And if it happens on camera, I tell them it doesn't have to be there. If they don't want it there, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be there. But he was talking about his roommate, and he said, no, my roommate was a pilot. They put me in with the pilots, and he crashed on takeoff with a fully loaded bird, and he was trying to get out, and he couldn't get out, and he burnt to death, and he said, then he exploded, and he's like, and same thing, that never left him. The It's those moments of helplessness when somebody dies, when you really want to make a difference. And you see that the ground crews that I have talked to and the guys that have been on the ground, good Lord, their experience is just horrific, and same thing. It's that person you couldn't help, but you wanted to, and I really, each man deals with it differently. Some people put it in a box, don't look at it. Other people make friends with it. It's coping mechanism 101 from a human being. How are you going to deal with this?
I know that from my military history, going back as far as World War One, that it was always a fear of an airman to burn to death,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd even before that the planes were armed, they would carry a sidearm, which really in the event was to shoot
Yep.
themselves,
Yep.
and yeah, I can't imagine that, so
You got
but
a choice between burning or falling,
yeah, yeah,
if you get out, so um, very interesting. Tom Waska, when I was interviewing
yep,
him, General Tom, he was able to take George Bush back to Chichijima, George Bush the first,
right,
and George never knew what happened to any of the guys in his plane, and they actually found a guy that was on the island and had seen George get shot down, and he told about how one parachute came out, but it didn't deploy, and the guy went into the ocean. And then he saw George's come out, and there was no third. He had never been told until that point in time what happened to his crew. He never knew what happened until, many years later. And by the grace of God, there's a human being that was there, so it gave him some closure himself, knowing what happened,
yeah,
because, you're in a plane, tell everybody to get out. Nobody's there. What happened? I mean, it happened so fast.
yeah.
So that's very interesting.
I think that with my interviews, that I am very fortunate to know these men for quite a while. So there's already a friendship that's built up and a trust. And I try and skirt a line of bringing up a story that is not particularly pleasant, but the public know enough about or told enough of the story, and then I change the topic. So what I'm trying to say is I try and read the veteran as they're telling me this, and if I see that it's going down a path which is going to really upset them, I quickly change it. But I
Yep.
want people to know, that these guys' war is not over on paper. Sure, it ended 50 plus years ago, but they're still living those events,
What
right?
was it? One guy told me, he goes, I can't remember what I had for breakfast. He said, but I could tell you every detail about that mission because emotions brand in memories. And that's what it is. High emotions will really burn that into you, every day. What do? We're existing.
Yeah,
But, in a mission, whether it's on the ground or in the air, you're going to remember those moments, and it's time slows down for them during those high intensity moments.
It does make you think, if you're having a bad day at work and you're going, oh, this didn't work, or, this guy didn't pay me on time. And then you're talking to these veterans about, okay, I lost my friend last night and now I got to go out again. It's just, it really puts it in like what really is important, right? That's
I had one veteran that said to me, he said, no matter how bad your day was in Vietnam, somebody was having a worse day. And he said it could always get worse, no matter how bad yours was. It could get a lot worse. Yeah. So,
Is there a story which really that you enjoy telling? That I mean, you've interviewed quite a few veterans now, or are there a couple of stories that really like your top two that you've heard, or
um, a
I'm putting
humorous moment. When I met Doug Davis, the EC-47 pilot, my girlfriend and I walk in, and pilots have a look. They have a corporate look about them. And I just glanced across the room and I said, that dude was in Air America. I can tell already, just the long hair and the whole, he just had that he didn't get shoved through the machine,
yeah.
he was definitely a private contractor. So I talk him into doing an interview with me, and he has this wonderful voice. It's almost like a cartoon character. He's like, "Hey man, we was just there. I was just the bus driver. If I was getting shot down, don't beat me up. I don't know shit, man." And he would crack me up. And at the end of my interview with him, he looked at me and goes, "You're a pretty good interrogator, dude. You got more out of me than I thought you would." So when you meet them, they're each characters in their own. Favorite stories. Jim George came to me and he wanted, he did an interview with a wingman the first day. Then he sought me out the second day. He said, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about courage, you know? And he had just read a book, and it was somebody that was flying F-105s. And he said, this guy professes and says, I was scared to death. I made it through pilot school, did this. I was great. I get to war and people are dying pretty quick up over the north because they're getting shot down a lot. And he had to learn to manage his fear. And Jim goes, I didn't really have that fear. He said, but you saw guys every day that you looked and went, I don't know if they're going to make it back. I don't know if they're going to be okay. But he talked about the fear, which I thought was one of the greatest things that somebody could do, is bring out who had the greater courage. Me, who didn't have kids and didn't have any connection and, quite frankly, just went into it with bravado, or was it the guy that got in that aircraft every day and was scared to death and had family and, did their job very well? He said, I think that's the greater courage, to get in that aircraft. That's one of my favorite ones, um, personally, because courage is always the question. What would you do in that situation? You got all
Right.
these things going in your head. And I guarantee you've asked yourself, you know, after you get done with an interview, you're like, how would I execute in that situation? Could I manage that? You know?
You know what? I think that every alpha male out there probably has thought at one time in his life, I wonder what it would have been like. I wonder how I would have reacted.
Yep.
And from my interaction with the veterans, the combat veterans, you just don't know until it's there.
Yep.
And like Lynn Black tells one story that his team leader, they go in there, they've been inserted, and where's the team leader? He's crouching down with his rosary beads. He's gone. Now
Yep.
you got a choice. You can be mad at that guy, or you can go like Lynn did. Okay, plan B. I'm taking
Yep.
charge.
Yep.
And so, how many people have that ability and not panic? I think that's rare. But I can say that with what special forces soldiers are is they have to be independent thinkers. So if the shit does hit the fan and go sideways, you're not turning around to wait for your orders.
Yep.
You're in charge now. You got to take care of that, right?
Yep. You got to take care of yourself and your men. And I think you're right. When you go back to and you were asking about, you were talking about Lynn Black. I remember the innovation of the alpha male, whether it was Air Force, Army, Marines. Lynn wanted to capture prisoners. And somebody says, there's a difference between killing somebody with C4 and knocking them out. So Lynn goes out on the field and keeps walking into that concussion wave to see how far that point is. I mean, that takes a whole different human being that says, I think I can do this, And then you talk to the guys in the Air Force, they're trying to figure out how to, set up a screen. And somebody says, instead of dropping smoke canisters, let's make a curtain between us and the North Vietnamese and just lay a smoke trail. And then we can bring the helicopters in. It was the spur of the moment when things were going horribly wrong. What could you do? And, it was just a huge leap forward, putting down smoke screens when you were trying to get people out. Before, you're just dropping white phosphorus and you're trying to push the guys back and bring a helicopter in, and there's guns everywhere shooting at them. So that they could at least cut out half of that when they started going to smoke canisters, you know?
I think that whether that you're flying a high speed plane or you're running SOG or that style of mission, it's not seconds, it's actually a millisecond. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
a good example with the special forces guys is and I know more, like I said, more of the SOG guys. Their style shooting with the instinctive shooting is they don't aim. You don't have time to aim.
Yep.
So I'm sure that with the fighter pilots that they were so tuned in to their aircraft, the wind speed, everything, right?
When they say they strapped that aircraft on, it was part of them. They were part of it, and they were married in the air. And there was one guy that said, there's a lot of pilots out there, but there are damn few fighter pilots. And that's where the cream would rise to the top. And you would have guys that could really perform. They would have higher ranking officers trying to get a couple missions in, to get the notches on the belt to climb. And they'd take them out and they're like, you may be the major and I'm a second lieutenant, but I'm the flight lead and you're going to listen to me and we're doing it this way. And, they'd have little battles, but, when it came down to it, the leader's the leader. It's not, when you got into that position, it wasn't rank. It was who is the best for the job at that time. You look at one, it was called the Silver Bar SAR. 4 lieutenants dreamt up a search and rescue and pulled it off without anybody over them. They just said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Here's the plan. And they went and, they had 2 guys going in, and it's a great mission. That's another one, the Silver Bar SAR. That's another one with Lamar Smith and Bob Carlson. And Bob, he's funny. He's this little thin old fella, and he talks about, all of a sudden somebody shoots a SAM at him, and he goes, I got mad. He said, I'll tell you what, he said, I just pulled nose high, and he said, I unloaded all my rockets in their direction. He said, did I hit them? Nope, but they knew I could shoot back. I mean, that's a beautiful moment. So yeah, it's hard to say a favorite. Each moment and each man, they become like your favorite uncle,
Yeah.
and their families become your family. When they hurt, you hurt. When they feel joy, you feel joy. It's a beautiful thing. So, yeah, but I think the courage one is up there because you always ask yourself, what would I done? Because some of these things are pretty tough. you
Yeah.
know?
It's do you think that they were, I mean, I know that you probably haven't had the chance to interview them, but do you think that many of the fighter pilots in Vietnam were also pilots during World War II? Were there a lot of
I, I
Korea?
did have, I had several that had come through. Uh, what was that fella's name? But yeah, I had one gentleman. He was a P-51 pilot in
Wow.
World War II, and then he was in Korea, and he was a Skyraider pilot in Vietnam, and he was just a wonderful fella. Oh my gosh! But yeah, the thing that you found as technology advanced and the aircrafts got more involved, we gave up skill sets.
Mhm.
Stick and rudder was probably the thing that has saved more pilots learning how to fly stick and rudder and knowing the aircraft and being able to really maneuver it. When you get into everything that's high tech, I used to work at a helicopter company, at a tour company, and every time somebody came back and they were a Black Hawk pilot, everybody would run out to see them try to hover, a Jet Ranger for the first time because they haven't touched rudder pedals in forever, So now you got something that's old school, but the same exact thing happened during Vietnam. Jink Bender, I believe it was teaching people how to fly F-15s, and he was showing them stick and rudder, how to use the aircraft and every element of it to improve their flying, to keep, to improve their chances for survival and success in missions. So yeah, the World War II pilots were crucial in training the young guys on how to fly that World War II plane in a very modern world, because many of them, they were, you take George Merritt, who wrote Cheating Death. George is out, at Davis Monthan. He's flying, twice the speed of sound. He's got G suits, pressure suits, and he gets his orders to Vietnam, and he shows up and he's like, what in the world is that? He goes, this thing is huge and it's leaking oil everywhere. He goes, I felt like I was being punished. But then when he got into the mission role, he realized how important that mission was. But yeah, it was a tough transition. A tail dragger is a beast. That thing is a tail dragging plane. You don't have that much anymore. Most everything else is tricycle gear. So learning how to fly that weapon is a little bit crazy. The new Sky Warden that they're coming out with, it's going to replace the Sky Raider. Have you seen that? It's going to replace the A-10. It looks like a hopped up crop duster with an attitude, man. I mean, but it's a tail dragger. So there's going to be some guys. It is a totally different experience, because when you go down the runway, you have to look left and right, and you have to keep it going, left and right. And because your nose high, in most planes, you're level and just cruising, so
Right.
it's a whole different experience. It's flying from the seat of your pants, truly, so that's going to be an interesting, this year while we're down in San Antonio at the reunion. They're supposed to take us over where we see the new Sky Warden, hopefully, and we'll see, get a briefing on it. I'm interested in that.
So what are your plans for the future? What are your goals? What would you like to?
Oh, my
I mean,
personal goal is, just like you were talking earlier, is to inspire more people to pick up their cell phones
yeah,
and record their family members. That is where I'm heading next. And just, you and I can't do it all.
no, yeah,
And I get calls all the time. Hey, I know this guy, I know that guy. And you're like, okay, I got like 33 trips, I got all these things planned, and you're trying to fit it in between your work schedule, because you got to pay the bills. I'm like, just pick up the phone, and my goal is to inspire people to pick up that cell phone and to sit down. And the trick is to be quiet. I'm terribly chatty, so I'm trying to be more quiet and let the question, or let the I'm pretty much a conversationalist in my interviews, so I'm trying to pull back a little bit more and let the story evolve by itself. And that's the one bit of advice I would give is, make a few notes and say, can you tell me more about that? Very simple questions, and let the veteran lead the journey where it needs to go, because they know where they want to go eventually. You just keep asking simple questions, bring them along. Can you explain that? Just like you did with prairie fire. Would you like to explain what a prairie fire emergency is? Most people don't understand that. I was watching one today where it was acronym soup. This dude was going down through every military acronym, and I was just trying to hang on for dear life. I'm like, nobody's going to understand what he's saying that wasn't in the military. But, capture the moment and bring it forward. The other thing we're doing is we've acquired quite a few photo archives. There was a gentleman out west. He worked with Tom Dwelly, another one of my great interviews. Tom's a hoot. You want to talk about pilots and what they'll do to keep flying? Tom was in Reno removing an oxygen bottle, and it blew his fingers off his hand. It was a terrible accident. And I kept looking at his hand. I'm like, something's different about his hand. He had his toes. The doctor said, you're never going to fly again. He said, that's not going to happen, doc. You got to figure this out. They took the toes next to his big toes, cut them off, and sewed them onto his right hand. And his little toes work as fingers. You watch the interview, you'll see it. You're like, holy cow, that guy. I mean,
Wow.
he was not going to quit flying at all. He was funny. He goes, I can trim my airplane fine and drink scotch just fine. I'm good, but that's what they'll do. But yeah, that's another guy that's just holy cow. But he had a gentleman that was helping him with his videos, his interviews, and George would convert films over. His passion was saving films. So old films, old photography, whatever. He'd go to yard sales and he would find family albums with military people. So we were talking, and he said, "I'm afraid that if I die, my stepchildren are just going to throw all this away. All this work's going to go nowhere." And he said, "Would you, consider purchasing it?" So we wrapped it up because I was having him do some work, and I just folded it into the purchase of converting some films over. And he sent me terabytes of photos. So I have 82nd Airborne. I mean, there's everything under the sun, but we've got the Battle of Bastogne. I've got guys in Birch's Garden. I mean, the whole thing. So what we're doing is we're taking all of those, digitizing them, making slideshows, and then converting them into, slideshow videos as well. But our goal is to keep that as much as we can. So we're going to tell veterans, if you have photos you want saved, if you'll give us rights to keep them, we'll archive them and we'll do this with them. I need a story. Where were you? What were you doing? I want a little history on it. That way it can accompany a blog. And that way that information doesn't get lost with time, because, my greatest fear is showing up at somebody's funeral and all their stuff being thrown in the trash.
It does happen all the
Oh,
time.
that when you say what's my goal is to prevent as much of that as possible and get that content saved somehow. And if you try to, give it to an archive somewhere, it has to be in some organized format. You can't just give them raw photos. They don't want to deal with that. So we're trying to document and archive and catalog as much as possible, whether it be video or photography. So, I don't talk about my business partner. I haven't even mentioned him, but my buddy Ray Surface, he's my best friend. We've been working together for 15 years now. And he's been along on this ride. He's the quiet guy you never see. He's the coder. A couple, his most recent thing was, what do we do with all this? So he's over there coding with AI, and he's like, all right, I got this set that'll bring this folder in. It'll document, bring everything in. It'll create the video. It'll create the slideshow. We're done, and he's the coder, cool guy in the background that makes all this possible, you know. He just pats me on the butt and says, go have fun. Here's a camera. Go get some interviews, So there we go. We're out the door. But
I think the one of my pet peeves is that when you spend the time to do what you're doing or what I'm doing or what others are doing, and you see a picture that you like and it's on someone's website, and you think, okay, I'll take that picture. Well, number one, you should be asking if you can,
Yep.
Use that picture. Have the decency to do that. Most people will say, let me ask the veteran, or but here's the thing. If you don't ask, what normally happens is you steal the photo, but you don't normally take the history behind that photo. And then when you share that photo, it gets shared all through Pinterest and everywhere else. And it pisses me off that I see these pictures of guys who I know there's no history, or somebody's put the wrong history on it. And that is not right. If you're going to do that, please just talk to the person that runs the website, or if they're a veteran, hey, do you mind? As I said, yeah.
Byron Huckey is one of the great A1 Skyraider historians. I mean, he was a pilot, but he built the A1 Skyraider Association page. He also has My Combat Journal, where not many of these guys kept flight logs. You weren't supposed to, because it was all top secret, but they would write down journals. And he has a brilliant website. It's older, and he's asked us to take that website over and bring it up to speed. And the challenge is, he's in the same boat. People have taken his photos, and he's been, very insulted because they don't give credit to the person. And we're seeing more people that are really trying to be respectful. I don't know if you've gotten hit with copyright violations. Somebody was trying to hand me some film that they'd bought, and I said, I will get my own, thank you. In my personal business, I made a small oversight on a website and a one-by-one photo that came in with a template of the website. I didn't pull it out, didn't even think about it. That was a $1,500 fine for using that photo. I was like, I am not touching anything that I don't have the rights to, So, yeah, copyright violations are getting vicious out there. So I'm very, very cautious. And in the same sense, I also guard if somebody trusts me with their information. We put, military tails logos on stuff just to make sure that it's big enough. Yeah, it takes up a little bit of room on the photo, but it's not going to get cut out, and if you do, there's going to be an issue. I don't mind people using our information. I think it's great to share it. But again, like you said, let's put some work
Context.
behind what you
Yeah.
do and
Yeah.
make sure you give credit to the photographer or whoever owns that photo, and make sure that the history is correct, because I see things all the time when you pull it up online, and I don't really think that fact is correct, and you
Yeah.
start looking and it's something somebody's written and it's wrong, compared to what your research is. So, well,
Yeah.
maybe it's inconclusive sometimes, but make sure you do it as best you can.
Especially now that, I mean, I saw something with it was a Navy SEAL mission, uh, Bat 21, and they had a picture that they said was Tom Norris. It wasn't Tom Norris. It looked like Putin, and
Yep.
it was some AI generated. And so then
Oh,
on one forum, I see, oh, this is Tom Norris, and I said, no, it's not. This is
yep,
this, and then someone shared that to a different group on Facebook,
exactly.
and then I said, this is not,
I actually have the mission audio from BAP 2-1.
really, wow,
Yeah, that's the other thing. I will have veterans that, I'll be talking to them, and they're like, I have this reel to reel, or I have a cassette tape. What do I do with it? And I said, well, if you send it to me, I'll send it to my guy in Florida. I'll have it transposed over. I'll pay for it as long as you let me use it.
yeah,
And I had one guy, one pilot go, are you rich? Are you like financially well off? How do you do this? And I said, I'm not financially well off. I am my own business owner, and I got to be honest, I look for write-offs, and I really enjoy doing this. So, I will invest money in something I enjoy doing to have a great outcome, which, this is what this is. It's not, if I can hit net zero, I'd be happy as hell. I'm in the hole most of the time, but it's what you do. It's the thing you press into. And so if somebody sends me, like Roger Youngblood, when we first started working together, I was filming him here in Tennessee as he was talking about smuggling those planes. So at the end of the day, he's like, hey, camera guy, come over here. I got this mission audio. It makes me sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks. Can you fix it? And I was like, I don't know. So let me go home with it. I said, is it digital? He's like, yeah. So I just kept listening to him and stretching it out because it was compressed at a different speed. And all of a sudden, I became a miracle worker in his eyes. And he said, he goes home to Texas and he said, I got some 8mm films I'm going to send you. And I went, okay. 138 reels of 8mm film that he had never watched came in our door.
wow,
And I'm sitting there and I said, what is this? And he said, I used to just take a camera. He said, I had two tours. One when I was flying the, I think it was the C-123. That was his first tour. It's the same engine that's on the Sky Raider. That's why he flew it. So he'd know
okay,
how to, that's what he got into, and he transferred over. He said, but I would just, bungee strap this on, the cowling and just pull the trigger when I went rolling in. So we've got gun camera film, we've got bombing missions, rockets going off, just, and stuff around the base, every kind of airplane you could think of flying. And then there'll be other guys that say, well, I have a reel of film, sitting over here, it's in the attic. And the problem is if you don't get it
yeah,
fixed soon, it rots. If it starts smelling like rotten eggs, you're in big trouble. Then you have to spend money. That's where I was sending stuff out to California to the one guy. He puts it into a soup, and basically it gives him, it makes it elastic. It's a cleaner, and it gives him one run through the machine, and that thing is destroyed. All you get one
Wow.
chance at it. So, when it gets to that point and it's brittle and it's starting to smell, there's a little you can do to help possibly. But that's our goal, is to make sure that those things don't get thrown away or they don't get discarded. I told you in my bio, early on, I was working on a construction crew with my father, and the vets would come back, and it always bothered me that it was almost like they were coerced into being quiet. The counterculture was so negative in the 70s, and everybody just came back and put their head down. And I watched those guys, two of them go through a PTS moment where somebody let off a rocket, screwing around 4th of July. I thought they were kidding. And they both went tearing over me and dove into the bushes. And I was laughing. My dad jerked me up. I mean, ragdolled me, shook me, screamed at me, planted me back on the ground. And he was like, "You don't ever laugh at them." I hated the fact that I realized what those guys had gone through. I hated the people that made them do that. And I know hate's a strong word and we shouldn't hate, but you don't have to be ugly to the veteran. You don't have to be ugly to the left or the right. You got to take care of everybody. And what we do is make sure that we save some of that and we give somebody a voice. That's really what we're
Yeah.
about. Our goal is to make sure no veteran will ever, if they want to say something, buddy, I'm in the car and I'm gone. I'll pack my gear and I'll go east of the Mississippi. You get west of the Mississippi, that's a plane ticket, So I usually go anywhere over here and do what I can for them.
Yeah, and should anybody be watching this and they want to get in touch with Rich, you can just email me and I'll get you in touch. Or,
Yep.
a lot of the SOG community know who I am, and I'm very lucky that some veterans have entrusted me with their photographs, all of them, and just with the understanding that I'm passing you my history. I'm trusting you. So, you know, that's a real honor when someone does that,
Passes the torch and says,
Yeah.
"Don't let this light die." And that's what it is. Don't let us be
Yeah.
forgotten. Well, you take the Secret War.
Yeah.
There was whispers and rumors and nobody really knew. And now that they're starting to open up, and these gentlemen are testifying as to what they did and the heroics and the ingenious adaptation in a hostile environment. There are lessons everybody could learn if you sit down and listen to these people. My goodness, it's kind of, yeah, it's an honor to and a pleasure to work with them and save these moments.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you.
Have your veterans been dealing with a lot of Agent Orange issues?
Yes. Yeah.
Man, last year when I was at SOAR, Doc Paget gave a presentation talking about how now Agent Orange is not only affecting the veteran, but it's going down through their children and their grandchildren. So it's in the gene, and you're like, oh, and they're trying to work through that. So that was a great piece that gave some information. He's going to do a follow-up. I'm going to film it again this year on where they are with Agent Orange now. So hopefully
Yeah,
we'll have
I
more
guess it
information.
changes your whole, DNA structure, and you imagine how nasty that is, and um, I'm pretty numb now to, graphic images and those kind of things. But when I see that there are children being born in Vietnam with all these birth, defects, that is just something else. I mean, that is, you know, uh, that's just brutal. And I didn't know until recently, within the last couple of years, that there was Agent White, there was Agent Purple. Orange was the only one that basically did a whole bunch of things, but they
Yeah.
tested it, and these guys, if they were up in an airplane, they were shoveling it out. well, it's okay. You'll be fine. You know?
Yeah. I did an interview with like Bill Mackey, and he was, I believe he was a Raven as well
Okay.
up north. He did some flying for the Ravens, but I think he was, he had the Raven tattoo and he was kind of elusive about it. You talk to a Raven, you're not getting straight answers. They were super CIA guys, but he was talking about how he was a crew chief and Operation Ranch Hand turned over all those C-123s. He said, we didn't know what they were. He said, that stuff, that orange crap was caked on the inside of everything. He said, so we had to scrape it all down, so they're on the runways scraping it off with putty knives, no respirators, no hazmat gear, just seeing if the metal had been fatigued. And I was like, have you had any health problems? He's like, I've died 3 times. He said, I've been on the table and died. He said, I have all kinds of things wrong with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, but it's just the the chemicals that they were exposed to. I understand it was a great idea to defoliate the jungle, but it's got some really lasting effects. It's I would say as bad or worse than mustard gas. Mustard
Oh,
gas doesn't seem to have the lineage in the ground that
yeah.
Agent Orange did, but we outlawed that stuff for reasons. But I again at the time they didn't know it was that toxic.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it was a quick fix to the problem, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's one of those
Now,
things that was a great idea at the time, but kind of went poorly, you
yeah.
know.
So before that, we end the interview because I'd like to try and keep it to an hour. I think everybody can handle an hour. When it gets into a little longer, people get a little fatigued. You mentioned something earlier, and I wanted just to recap on that. You mentioned that CNN uh, did a report about something, and if you don't mind, I'd like you to tell the public about that because it was a massive screw up of what
Yes.
they. So I'll turn it over to you.
CNN, when they came out with their newsstand program, it was going to be their round the clock news program. They approached a bunch of veterans and they said, we've read John Plaster's book and, we want to know more about this mission. And they posed it as it was going to be a puff piece, a nice piece, giving homage to great soldiers. So everybody talked to them and they were very free and very open. It debuted and it was called Valley of Death. And CNN accused everybody involved with dropping sarin gas, which is incredibly poisonous. To give you an idea, a 10 milligrams of sarin gas will absolutely kill you very easily. That's the size of an aspirin, and if it's powdered, it's going to be understood. It's lethal. So they accused them of dropping sarin gas on American defectors, on women, children, and the North Vietnamese. Now, our soldiers are in there at the same time. What we used riot gas, CBU, I believe it was 30, but it was riot gas because the troops were so embroiled. We were supposed to be in that position. Operation Tailwind was part of a much larger campaign Operation Gauntlet. They were going to pull some attention and some VC off of that area, so they drop them in. It's supposed to be one day. Turns out to be, I believe, 4 days, 3 days, 4 nights. I'm sorry, 4 days, 3 nights. And Gene McCarley ran that program, and it was absolutely brilliant. They went in. Now, this is 40 miles into Laos. To give your viewers an idea of how far that is, when Tom Stump, one of the rescue pilots, was briefed on it, he looked at it and he said, what are they doing way over there? So, and he said, if I was going to get one pilot out of there, he said it would be incredibly difficult, almost impossible. He said, how many people do we have? There was 120 mountain yards and 16 Americans. So he's like, well, all right, we'll go. Let's see if we can get these guys out of here. But they had gotten so embroiled and they had tied up so many of the Vietnamese. I think there was two divisions, and this is where Gary Mike Rose received the Medal of Honor. They only lost, I believe, three people on the entire mission, which is unheard of with that kind of contact, continuous. And they overran a VC base, and they captured all everybody was out hunting for them, and they just walked into their camp, and evidently it was really nice. They were like, it had wooden sidewalks, it had a post office, it was great. And they walked out with all this intel. So now the VC are after them, and they're not going to let them leave. So it becomes this huge battle trying to get out of there. So as they leave and they get out, just one of the helicopters crashes, with 50 guys on board, and only one guy got killed there. So it's again miracle upon miracle that this happened, and it was one of the best executed missions of the war. Well, CNN gets a hold of it. Now we're baby killers, we are biological weapons users, and this is how I got involved again with SOAR, was filming all this. And the more you hear the pieces and the parts, and I've watched tons of the depositions, they're going to be putting a lot of that in our hands to bring that public as well. And CNN, they were told by their own analysts. There was a general, I'm trying to remember his name, but he was on staff with CNN. He goes, "No, this is wrong. This is so erroneous. There's no way this is true." And they were just gung ho to get the headline and make it happen. They ran this show, and everybody again is thinking, wow, they're going to do this really nice piece on us and talk about what we did. And they're sitting there with their children, and they're being called baby killers. And I mean, it was the typical Vietnam hit. So all of your SOG guys, they are, if you talk about some of the most honorable people, the SOG warriors are. They would not do anything malicious like this. It was a character assassination, and it was a horrible thing. And so they have battled for years, and we're going to be working on a little piece there, and it's going to be called Reclaiming Their Honor. And we're going to take deposition, and then I'm going to have the real person they're talking about telling their side, because they had some loony guy that got out of somewhere. There's always the posers, this guy was in the military at some point, but he's telling everybody that he was on the phone with Richard Nixon, called him personal to give him a mission, and he was in Hawaii, and he was like some rear echelon, file clerk, but they dropped him in the jungle, and there was people out there that met him and gave him food and water and had him watch this whole thing. I'm like, no, you talk to a SOG guy, they're like, there ain't nobody friendly when you get dropped in the bush, and nobody's going to give you anything, But Operation Tailwind has been if you asked about the mission that means the most, it seems like that's the one we started with, and it keeps coming up in different places. So it's the mission that we need to finish, and make sure that is documented well. The truth. Not conjecture.
Yeah. Well, that's good. The facts are the facts. And I believe the thing about history is, someone told me years ago, it's his story. So it's all about who actually wrote the history. Right.
Yep.
And this is why, to correct this while these guys are still alive, is so important. We don't want our kids to the future and their kids to go, well, how about this sarin gas was, that's what the Germans use, right? In the camps, I believe they use. And
they use Cyclone B in the camps. But
okay.
when you were talking, I did that interview with Gary Mike Rose. He said, the problem that they found out after World War I with gas is you can't control it. It goes everywhere. It's on your troops and their troops. You kill everybody.
Yeah.
He said, yes, people have this, but no, we don't use it, and we used the riot gas to separate everybody so they could get them onto helicopters.
Right.
At the very end, Gene McCarley, he's the last man on the ramp, and he said, there are VC coming up to the ramp. He said, if they'd thrown a grenade, it would have killed us. He said they were still, that's how tight the fighting was. They were pursuing him through the elephant grass, and they were right at the ramp as they lifted off. you know? So either they didn't have any ammunition left, but they were still pursuing, you know? They were that close. And without that riot gas, I doubt you could have separated them and got those helicopters in and out.
Well, Mr. Benjamin, I have really enjoyed this last hour with you. It's nice to speak to a fellow historian, you know, and somebody who wants to document this for future generations to come. I'm going to make sure that your website is on the back of this interview. And
Well, thank you.
Like I said, if anybody wants to contact Rich, they can do it through your website as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have done with the website, we had a request from the pilots because some of the titles are not by their names. Okay. We have included a glossary so that if you want to know somebody that was either Jim George, here are his 2 interviews. You click on his name, it'll pull up 2 interviews. If you want to know Operation Tailwind or Boxer 22, you click on that and it pulls up all the videos that associated that. So we built a information tree basically so that it's easier to find. It's more of a resource and more of a tool like that. So that's one thing that we're very proud of, that, you know, we're trying to organize our data so that it's easily searchable and you can find whoever you're looking for if they're mentioned in a film. So
that's great. Well, thank you again. Don't go anywhere. Just for the public, this is the ending part of this. So I hope you enjoy this with Rich, and his interviews are great, but you won't see his face. You'll just hear his voice.
It's always about them. Always about them. Their history.
Thank you, sir.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world.